Hi, folks. Welcome to the Mary Trump Show. We are not Mary Trump. Jen and I are subbing in today as co hosts of the show as Mary has attended to other business. And so we're super excited to co host together for, I think, is this our first time, Jen, co hosting together?
Can you believe it?
I think that
Wow.
it is. Why?
This
Because
is
I always
insane.
we're always either on here together or I'm interviewing you on one of my 50, 11,000 podcasts. So
Hey,
that's
don't
fun.
touch don't touch that microphone thing. It made my ears
Oh,
hurt.
I'm sorry. So Jen, you have been in court for the longest time, and so we can go over review the hell that we've all been living in for the last week plus in America. I find that every single week, I don't know about you, I want to end the week with a martini that is the size of a swimming pool, so that I can move through all of the emotions that I have. Hi, Brian.
Hey,
Surprise. Um,
I start the week with the martini,
you
Danielle.
start
How
the
are
week
you?
and not you don't end it with it. Okay. Um,
Actually, it was yesterday the start of the week because I had one last night with my husband.
it
So
was
yes. Okay.
Monday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so let's start off. Brian, well, Jen, you tell us you are now peeking your head back up to the surface. We have the debt ceiling, we have fascism on the rise. I just saw a video that Joy Reid from MSNBC posted. It was a TikTok about Lauren Boebert. I did one as well because she thought that it was a great idea to pose with a new t-shirt that has an AR-15 going across the front of it that says, since we're redefining things, this is a hole puncher, a cordless hole puncher. I'm going to put it in the chat, folks. If you follow me on Twitter, you will see, because I reposted it, D2 cents, what you see up here. It is so disgusting. And I don't understand how people like Lauren Boebert are voted into office. I don't understand how after children were just murdered this past weekend in Texas, before that in Tennessee, people shot in Kentucky, Alabama, all over the place, that you would wear a t-shirt with an AR-15, making a joke about it and smiling as you're holding it up. But Jen,
No class.
no class, just trash. Um,
Yeah. I mean, look, it's the sideshow has taken center stage in this country. And I'm all for, creative ideas about how to burn down your own trashy life. But, it's kind of like, these books that you read about, organized crime. And with the organized crime, I just finished reading one. So this is for fun because, that's how I waste my time. And, the novel I was reading, the typical trope is when things start to get really bloody out on the streets, at some point, the mob folks get together and they're like, listen, the ordinary people aren't going to allow this. We have to manage our own crooked business without hurting civilians and, buildings blowing up, blood in the streets and such. And that's kind of like how I feel about people like crazies like Lauren Boebert and, homophobic people and gun-toting folks. This is America. And if you're going to live your freakish sideshow of, being a deadbeat, not paying your own debts, and being toxic and mean and telling jokes that aren't funny and hurting people, I want to protect the innocent, but I especially don't want the sideshow to kind of take over what should be the center of America. And America, like any other country, I'm not saying American exceptionalism, but America, like any other country, is filled with creative, smart, talented, loving people who who are into human flourishing, creativity, all, sports, all the things that make humanity live to its best. And, I just find it petty, disgusting, and trashy
mhm.
that these people are not only taking over the government, but also trying to get rid of the good parts of our culture that show the best of what this country can offer. And it's pathetic. And it's like Jerry Springer just died. They are the Jerry Springer of politics and culture. That's
Phew.
what
I
I
mean,
have to
at
say.
least he was entertaining, right? Like, like he wasn't passing policy. Like he was just, entertaining and brought trash on, at the advent of reality TV. We didn't think that it was going to seep into our politics like a cesspool. Brian,
That's not nice to cesspools. I think they have
it's
some
true.
function. Okay.
As somebody who swims in the soup every day, and by the way, I love whenever you call the White House press corps, just DC in general, the soup. We went, over the weekend, we had some lightheartedness with the White House Correspondents dinner. It was a mix of lightheartedness as well as some serious notes that the president hit in his speech. But I wanted to get your reactions because some were saying that they felt that the White House Correspondents dinner, that was really Biden's reelection campaign launch, and that it wasn't so much the video that he put out, that that he hit a lot of different tones. And I wanted to get your reactions from that dinner.
Well, I wish I would see him in the White House for as long and as often as we saw him at the White House Correspondents' dinner. He had a good he had a tight 5, as they say in the business. He was up there. He actually did a tight 10. Good stand up, and he can dice and slice with the best of them. I think he's great fencing, verbally fencing. I would like to see him more often. Yeah, it was his kickoff for there's no doubt that was the kickoff to his reelection campaign. But the thing that really kind of disturbs me about it is when we're talking about, and this is us, this is the White House Correspondents Group, the press corps. We treated it as if it were a very solemn affair, that we were taking, our case about the First Amendment to the public, and we were taking it seriously. And there's just nothing more obscene to me than watching reporters wax philosophic about the First Amendment when they don't exercise it on a daily basis. And at the same time, we're talking about freeing journalists that have been jailed. Mm-hmm. And yet we've never come to grips with the fact that we had a journalist killed by Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
That you're looking at Jamal Khashoggi.
Yeah.
The president promised on the campaign trail to do something about that. He did nothing about it. Trump did less. Trump, I think, elevated MBS to, godlike stature, and he's the one who's responsible for the death. Then you've got Julian Assange, and think what you will of him. He's still in prison, but the only thing he's charged with is distributing information, and we're still prosecuting him for that. And there was no one harmed in that. Reality Winner spent her time in prison for letting loose that information. So I find it when reporters stand up and wax philosophic about the First Amendment, I often have to laugh, because I don't think we're very good at our jobs, and that we like to think of ourselves as the keepers and the holders of the torch, but we don't hold people to the fire very much. And it would be really nice to see Joe Biden out in front of us answering questions more often, because he represents his administration better than anyone else does. He's quite good at doing it. The people on his staff are not that good, and we need to see more of him. And he says, the thing that he said, Danielle, that is really telling me, he said, judge me if I'm too old, judge me by my actions. Okay. Mm-hmm. Can we see a little more often so we can make that judgment? Just like to see every once in a while, pal. He hasn't been to the White House briefing room yet. So he's done a lot of good things as president, but the communication in this administration still is sorely lacking.
One of the things I just want to go back to one of the points that you made, Brian, with regard to the First Amendment and journalists that have been killed and are currently in prison. Ayman Mohyeldin, whose show I joined during the White House Correspondents' dinner for their special coverage last Saturday, also brought to the attention that the president didn't mention the Palestinian American journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed by Israeli soldiers.
Yes.
And that he felt, and I agree with him, that was also a missed opportunity, because again, we want to
how about pretend. Those who were jailed in the Carolinas?
Yeah.
We're taking pictures of videos of cops. How about the one who was beaten in, what was it, Idaho? Look, and I don't say this lightly. I mean, I spent my time in jail 4 times to defend the First Amendment, so I know of which I speak. And it bothers me to, we call it the nerd prom in DC when we go to
Yep.
and it is. I mean, we take ourselves, it was a moment of lightness, which is fine, but then to take ourselves so seriously, they also call, DC Hollywood for ugly people, and I'm telling you, that's a trope. But the simple fact of the matter is, I wish we would take the First Amendment more seriously day to day and not just reserve it for one night out of the year and make it the mountain on which we celebrate.
I mean, I wish that we took the First Amendment as seriously as the far right takes the Second Amendment, right? That there is
exactly.
just, there are no policy can move around with regard to words aren't the same, don't have the same effect as bullets in this country, and yet we don't elevate the importance of freedom of speech as the foundation of our democracy in the way that the far right has made. Not even the far right, just the
free
right.
speech is democracy.
Yeah. Exactly.
And when Trump came out and said, we are the enemy of the people, my comeback was always, no, we are the people. That's, and I'll defend those that, it used to be, I disagree with what you say, but will defend to death your right to say it. So you can hate me. You can feel free to call me all kinds of names. You can't act on that. That's why you get to see the Ku Klux Klan march, because they have free speech rights. I would rather see those people out in public so I can identify them. And that's one of the blessings of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert is, boy, they're right out there in the front. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to guess what they're all about. They're telling you. And if you choose that instead of choosing wisely, then, it's like that scene in the now I'm having a moment. It's the scene in Indiana Jones at the end with, when you chose poorly, choose wisely. Don't choose poorly, but you need to see who these people are. You need to give them the opportunity to speak, and that gives you the opportunity to know what they're all about. But the far right and to some extent, many people in government don't want you to hear or see, or transparency is not their thing, and that hurts us all.
Yeah, I know we're talking about the press, and and sort of the role here, but I want to kind of pivot a little, if you'll allow me, because this sort of at the center of everything right now is where the rubber meets the road, which is the money, right, in the economy, and the fact that while they're also having the sideshow, and while we're also worried, as you're sort of the undercurrent of what you're saying, Brian, is we have basically two viable candidates running in the primaries. We have Donald Trump running as the Republican candidate.
Is he viable?
I was going to say, I'm like,
wait a minute. I'm not giving you that one, Jen.
Well,
he's on the ticket, but I don't know.
Let's say lead. The leading candidates are viable in terms of will maybe get a nomination. We've got Donald Trump in the Republican candidate. We have Joe Biden as a Democratic candidate. I'm confident that I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. You are a journalist, and of course you want to make sure that this is a candidate who can make it through the election and make it into the White House and govern. Again, I'm just speaking for myself. I have no worries, but that, we're not supposed to take things on faith. We're supposed to take things on evidence. And so you're right. The press needs to do its job in that way. I also think the press needs to do its job in another way, which is actually covering financial markets and economic policy in a way that the public can understand, and that's not just about who's for this and who's against something. And I'm seeing that coverage, and maybe this has more to do with the public's appetite and understanding how any of this stuff works. But I'm deeply concerned that the Republicans aren't just playing a game. They're playing a game that we're all going to lose when they're holding our economy and our credit rating in this country hostage to their pet projects and their desire to drown our social programs in a bathtub. And I
They're
really
only
wish.
In power, Jen.
What'd you say?
It's just a power grab. Everything with them is a power grab. The debt ceiling is, and you won't get us in the press to discuss it. You'll get a few, But most of us, like in the press corps, in the White House press corps, we don't understand it. There are people, these are young kids that are coming straight out of school and covering the White House. They don't understand the debt ceiling.
Well, I'm not sure members, I have to tell you, and I'm not making to try to be insulting, I'm not sure that members of Congress themselves understand
you
how
think
the Fed
Marjorie
works.
Taylor Greene can't spell her name? How is she going
but honestly, no, and this is not meant to insult them. Even people who study economics, and even people with graduate degrees in all kinds of fields, finance or whatever, don't necessarily fully understand the big picture. And those who actually understand it aren't always the best at explaining it. And then there's the eyes glazing over, and the reach for metaphors. And although I don't like to liken the federal government's budget to a household, in one way, I'll explain why it's helpful. So what's going on right now, and I'm sure folks listening to this already know this, is that we have in our budget, the federal government hires people, like we have a military, we have contracts to provide things, whether it's the vaccine that we provide or uniforms for the military or paying for salaries for government officials or whatever it is that we are paying for to invest in this country. We've made commitments, and by refusing to lift the debt ceiling, what we're saying is we're going to default on those existing commitments. It would be like this. It would be like if let's say I were much wealthier than I am now. Let's say I had a lot of assets, right? And I have credit card bills. And let's say I've hired a summer research assistant, and I can't imagine, and I have to pay my mortgage. And I decided, and I've made a commitment that I only want to take on so much debt, right? And I look at my monthly bills and I'm like, you know what? My monthly bills are exceeding what my cash flow is. I'm only bringing in this much money. And I've now made commitments because I decided to buy a bunch of stuff and I decided to hire a bunch of people, but I don't feel like paying those bills. So I'm just going to, instead of borrowing against my house, let's say I own a house on the Cape. Wouldn't this be nice? That's worth $2 million. And I don't owe anything on it, but I like not owing anything on my house in the Cape. And I say, you know what? I'd rather be debt free on that house. I'm not going to borrow. I could easily take a line of credit against it for a few $100,000 and therefore use that to pay my bills. But Danielle and Brian, I don't feel like doing that.
That was what Michael Cohen did. He took a HELOC loan out so he could pay off Trump.
Okay, well, yes, but I could take a home equity loan or even a first mortgage. Well, actually, it wouldn't be a purchase mortgage. I could take a home equity line out on that house and be able to easily make my monthly debt payments. I can pay my car payment. I can pay my mortgage. I can pay the summer research assistant. I can pay for the shit on my credit card that I already bought. But if I decide not to do that, that's kind of what the federal government is doing. But let me make it more stark. The federal government isn't like me because unlike, how I imagine that I had that house on the Cape, it has unlimited money because we can just sell treasury, but we can borrow as much as we want. And this is what's a little complicated because the Fed can print money that just inflates the value of, that just, weakens the dollar and maybe possibly causes more inflation, which can be dealt with other ways, which Republicans have figured out how to do. Sorry, are you okay, Charlotte?
Oh, you all right?
Like Charlotte.
I'm so sorry.
I sneezed at the same time.
What a way to enter the conversation, huh?
You don't like spending.
I literally just spilled the tea just now. So.
Oh, okay. Well, this is so. Hi, Charlotte. This is what I'm already bored by what I'm saying. Okay, so the bottom line is my point. The point I'm getting to is the U.S. government will never voluntarily default on its debt. It's only a voluntary thing, and it's a piggy thing, and it's turning us all into deadbeats. And I don't want to be a Republican deadbeat. I want to be someone who honors my debts. So that's what I have to say. And welcome, Charlotte. And Brian, you have something to add.
You've got two issues. One, they do need to raise the debt ceiling to make the payments.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
right.
They have to do that. But ancillary to that, yeah, you do have to go and look at how you're spending your money. But guess what? What the Republicans don't want you to know is that most of that money is being spent on overinflated budgets that they could easily cut specifically in defense, but that's not politically popular to do it. So what they want to cut is the stuff that they believe will keep money flowing into their pockets, and that's the social services that affect the rest of us. That's the real issue at the end of the day. The Republicans are trying to do two things: trying to embarrass Biden, and at the same time trying to continue to funnel money to the defense and to the richest of the rich and all of those people, while cutting your social services.
Wait, can I just jump in before I'm going to pass it to Charlotte 1 second? I just read this fabulous thing, to me, the most exciting thing I've read in a long time. Here's the headline. It came out at 11 today at the New York Times. Is the debt limit constitutional? Biden aides are debating it. Long story made short, it turns out that there is a very strong legal argument that the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution actually trumps, can I say that
There's
word?
a word.
Actually trumps, because we're on the Mary Trump show, actually trumps this congressional statute that set a debt limit. Now, it sounds good to me. I'm going to read you the language of the 14th Amendment, folks. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. Now, there are, of course, legal scholars who say that this does override the statutory borrowing limit, which is right now capped at $31.4 trillion. But it's not clear that Biden's going to make this move. Apparently, whenever Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, is asked, and others, they say, you know what? We don't want to even go there. But let me tell you,
that's too difficult.
Let me tell you, I would fucking go there before I would concede to what the Republicans want.
But I don't think, like, but real quick, as a layman person to the debt ceiling, and as somebody who doesn't regularly discuss economics, I think that the reality here for people to understand is, why do Republicans, to Brian's point, want to continue to funnel money into defense? Is because they have money in stock that have to do with defense. So
And
the
donors.
bigger and donors. So the bigger that those budgets get, the more money that ends up into their pockets, the more that they're able to continue their grift. And then while we say, like, oh, it's not politically astute, no, like, the reality is they don't give a shit about polls. But polls will tell you that what do people want? They want their money to actually go to the things that matter to them. Giving the defense, what was it? I think last year or the year before, like, it was like hundreds of millions of dollars over what they had asked for, right, in the defense budget, is not what the people want. We never give over the amount of money into education, into Social Security, into healthcare. No, we don't do that, because that's not where their donors are, and that's not where they can continue their growth.
Wait, Brian, I'm gonna
real quick.
One last thing.
Okay. Important point. Don't forget that the reason why we're in this position is because of the fact that Donald Trump and the Republicans all passed a tax cut to the rich, which made the debt, which screwed our debt. So now it's coming back to haunt them, and they don't want to pay for the tax cut that they voted in. This is created by the Republicans. This is created by those very people, Danielle, you just pointed at. And now that the bill's coming due, they want Biden to pay for it instead of them. Or at least pay the political price.
Let me reach over to Charlotte on this, because Charlotte, thank you for your service, might be the only Nerd Avenger present today who has served in the military, unless you did, Brian. I'm not sure.
Well, I served as a reporter in several conflict zones.
Okay, fine. That's good enough. So Charlotte, can you remind me of what your role was, and if you have some thoughts on this topic, or we can even branch out into some of the other topics we have for the day?
Yeah, it is troubling to me, as someone who served in the Army, that there is one party that has steadfastly stood by veterans and our families and our caregivers, and there is one party that has consistently stopped legislation to improve our lives. We forget the post 9/11 GI Bill, the one that transformed educational opportunities for veterans, was initially opposed by the Republican Party. It was Nancy Pelosi who led the charge in getting that passed and changed millions of families' lives overnight. We forget that it's the Republican Party who oversaw an inept and anemic VA in the early to mid 2000s. Remember that whole scandal with the old Walter Reed? That was under the Republican Party. It took Democrats coming in to clean it up. We forget that, once again, it seems that Republicans want to push massive cuts to the VA budget. That's funny because when folks my age were being sent over to Iraq and Afghanistan, there was something of a promise made to each other. We would serve honorably, and our country would take care of us when we came home. Republicans are reneging on that deal, and thank God President Biden is saying absolutely not going to happen. He posted a great tweet a couple hours ago, a flow chart on White House letterhead that basically said either you support veterans or you don't. Either you are opposed to cutting funding for veterans issues and veterans health care and veterans benefits, or you are going to seek those cuts irrationally because you're too scared to take away funding and cuts from the special interest groups and lobbyists who have been in your offices all day getting sweetheart deals behind the scenes. There is one party that protects veterans, and that is the Democratic Party. The other party does not. And I think that needs to be made abundantly clear right now.
It's interesting because it makes a lot of sense, supporting the part of the military budget that goes to corporations that manufacture weapons is very different than supporting a military budget that goes to the veterans who've sacrificed their lives, because that's caring. That's public welfare, right? It's like, we're done with you. What good are you? We've used you. Go away. I'm not speaking for myself, but that's how that feels to me.
Amen.
And
Danielle.
I think that.
And by the way, I would have assumed that Danielle was the one who served in the military. By the way,
Definitely not. And let me tell
she's
you
got that
something.
lieutenant.
She does.
While I am always so grateful for those that do serve, and have served, and I have family members that have served in the military. I will tell you that exactly what Jen just said. It is this use and abuse of people who, in a lot of ways, economically are forced to go into the military as a way to make a way for themselves and their families, right? And it is the low income, middle to low income folks who are not going into West Point, who are not going in and coming in at these high ranking levels. They are your everyday Americans that see the military as an option because they can't afford the debt that college costs in order to go in there. And then are used and abused. And when they return, they're given nothing. So I will hearken to the rapper Tupac that had rapped and said, you got money for war, but can't feed the poor. Like, that is the consistency of the Republican Party, is that they are the biggest war hawks. They are the biggest warmongers. But then when it turns around, when you look at the budgets for veteran affairs, it don't look like the fucking Pentagon. Right? When they come in and they say like, oh, but we have to cut spending. It is always at the expense of those that have literally sacrificed their limbs, their lives, and their mental health in order to, quote unquote, protect our democracy. And then when they return, they are given nothing.
I don't understand why they can't figure out how to make money off of that. I mean, you could have like a veterans food services companies that create sort of restaurants that will serve, that veterans get like a card, like a cash card that will allow you to buy meals either for free at a discount. There'd be a way to create a corporate infrastructure around helping veterans for sure. Also, I would say that if I had not been raised in a family that had money for college, there's no question I would have been in the military, because I'm someone who, I always had a corporate job. I am someone who always has an institution. I work at a law school now. I'm a very institutionally minded person who kind of likes low-key or I shouldn't call it low-key hierarchy, because I realize the military has it. But the difference is when you have a real hierarchy in a system, you also don't have the petty bullshit, as much of petty bullshit undermining. Or if you do, you can always find someone above you who can help sort out the kind of petty bullshit. So I know I would have been in that world for sure if I hadn't had other choices. And hopefully as a woman, I wouldn't have been sent to kill anyone. But,
if I hadn't had student loans, and of course a couple of good scholarships, I'd be there myself. My brother did go. Mm-hmm. But hey, Danielle, I'm just going to call you out on Tupac. That was based on an old song by Barry McGuire from the Vietnam War, Eve of Destruction. So if you're going to go Tupac, I'm going Barry
Come on.
McGuire. Take a look at Southern Alabama.
Brian. I love
Did you
it.
say Barry or is it
Over and
Barry
over and over
Manilow?
again, we're on the eve of disruption. But
Amazing.
it's an old sentiment, and it's very valid, and it has never changed. We put young people in peril. We put them in the worst situations, and then we don't care for them when they come back. And you wonder why people have PTSD. They used to call it shell shock. They used to call it other, all kinds of other things. And then they come back, and we never give them. The Veterans Administration, I have too many friends that are still suffering from the effects of PTSD and from serving this country and not being taken care of once they got back here. And so if you're going to spend money, he's absolutely right. The president is absolutely right. If you're going to care for vets, then you care for vets. When they come back, you take care of them. And the Republican Party is all about making sure that you take care of them, but they don't want to take care of you. They're okay with making sure that you have to give birth, but they don't want to make sure that there's somebody here to take care of them after they're born.
That's right.
They're make sure that you serve in a war, but they damn sure don't make sure that you're okay. We serve you when you get back from a war. They're okay with guns and violence, but they're not okay with with books. Everything that's done is hypocritical, and it affects, to tie it all in a bow, Jen, it really does reflect back. It's one of the reasons why we're facing the debt ceiling crisis today, because we mismanage and mishandle funds. And you're right, there are ways to make it absolutely not only cost efficient, but you could make money from it, but we don't do it.
And this is so, Brian, you're sparking something in my mind, which is two things that relate, which is we have a military, and all societies do, because humans are just not evolved enough not to want to steal each other's territory and kill people for power. And so everyone has these militaries. I just right. And we also we have money as a means of exchange and other things, but these things are supposed to be facilitating. In other words, a military is supposed to be there to protect and defend, in theory, not to, try to take over other people's territory. Money is supposed to be there to facilitate, growth, products and services you want, the arts, culture. It's not supposed to be at the center. And I just feel like things get sort of off kilter when the means become the ends. And I'm reminded of, if you'll follow this path, this fabulous biography of John Maynard Keynes, brilliant economist. And I came to find out for the first time reading it, I don't know if you know this about Keynes, but he supported the whole Bloomsbury group. He was supporting Virginia Woolf and all those people. And I guess the point I'm making is he's someone who understood money was important because of what it could buy, not in and of itself. And so you look at someone like the vulgar former president, Donald Trump, and money was important to him as a way of keeping score, and he bought tacky shit with it. It wasn't like he knows how to support the arts or culture. That's why he had, and the same thing with
playing poker. He has a lot of those paintings.
But it's the same thing with military. You're supposed, and that for this very reason, we should be thanking the people who do the dirty work for us, who do the protecting the country. We shouldn't be centering families carrying AK-47s in the street. Right? It's the same thing as throwing money around in front of people, like putting money in your bra and walking around. It's tacky, it's stupid, and it centers the means and not the good. And I just don't even know how this has become America. It's like whole fucking game show.
But look at the expenditures real quick. We have, I believe I looked at it recently. We are the top. We spend more than the next 10 nations combined on defense.
Our military.
And 8 of them are allies. So yeah, we it's and the bad part about it is, I'm not saying don't spend on defense. I'm saying, could we have some oversight?
But can we make it proportional to the actual needs of the country? Because I think that this in, like, Jen, I will push back on the military spending piece, because the reason why we have outsized military is because the biggest thing that we are protecting isn't democracy, it's white supremacy, right? And it's our ability to go ahead and take over other countries and disrupt their economies and be able to literally rape and pillage their natural resources. That it is about it has always been about manifest destiny. It was never about like, oh, let us protect our property. Because when you go back to tribal nations, when you go back to indigenous nations, they did not think in I, they thought in we. Right. So it is white supremacy and Eurocentric thinking that has then spread around the world.
So
in
like
terms
empire
of,
and the Monroe
protectionism.
Doctrine and let's take their oil, stuff like that. I know you're giving me some reality here.
You know, but
Well,
I say that to the point that, like, you know, we have been indoctrinated to believe that because things have always been this, like, because we understand it as having always been this way, that then, oh my God, if we were to downsize our military, and I mean downsize as giving them a rational budget that was aligned, to Brian's point, with the other 10 countries' budgets, and then redistributed that money across to our healthcare, across to the environment, education, and what have you, you understand the value of a country by what they value. And we value war because we want to be able to consume and crush as many people as possible. All of our problems stem from money. All of our problems stem from this need to overextend ourselves. We talk about immigration and, oh my God, all of these undocumented people are coming into the country. Well, if we hadn't have fucked up their economy, if we hadn't have fucked up their country, if we hadn't have played Monopoly and chess with their leadership, maybe their countries would be stable. Right. But we don't want to tell like the full context of those stories. And we just tell ourselves that, and we live in this center of fear that if we downsize the military, oh my God, they're going to come and get us. Who?
I'll go you one better. We always, you know, we put here, this is the God's honest truth. We have for the last 150 years screamed, ranted, and raved about Latin America and Southern America and how horrible it is. And we're worried about immigration. And guess what? We created the problem. It was, if you want to go back to 1927, Smedley Butler, who was the second highest decorated Marine ever, wrote a book called War is a Racket and talked about how the U.S. military is used in Central and South America in order to keep cheap labor for the companies in the United States. And then guess what? Well, they have cheap labor. So they're working for Dole Pineapple, working for, you know, whatever. And then, there's a demand. There's a demand in the United States for drugs. Oh my God. Well, they make the drugs in Bolivia and in Colombia. It's a supply and demand situation. We created, we have the demand. They have the supply. Everything that we talk about in immigration is our fault. And it started with the Monroe Doctrine. And it's how we treated Central and South America. It's keeping them poor and helpless, and that creates desperation. And of course, they're fine capitalists. There's a demand here, there's a supply there. What do you think is going to happen? And because people are poor and desperate, it becomes violent. And because it's illegal, it becomes violent. We created every problem. We created the problem in Iran. We created the problem in Iraq. Everything in the Middle East. Iran was just because they didn't want to nationalize their oil, right? They didn't want to turn their nationalized oil industry over to, you know, Shell Oil or whatever. We overthrew them. There is no situation on this globe where you can say the U.S. military has not had a hand, and it's usually against the advice of people in the military, made by people like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress and presidents who decide, well, this is a great way to use the military. It all goes back to the politics.
So where we are now, then, how do we? So if we have this as sort of the geopolitical backdrop that affects our domestic policy, because we're talking about that now, where do we go from here in terms of the culture wars? Like, how do they fit in? Because as much as, you know, we can say, well, they're a distraction, they seem to be designed to turn us against each other.
Exactly.
Yet again.
Exactly. The best way to make sure that this continues and it propagates is for the rich to make sure that the rest of us are fighting over shit they don't care about while they still keep taking away the money. I'm not saying that all the problems aren't true. They are. But they are created by and large to keep us squabbling while the rest, you know, poor white people and poor black people have far more in common with each other than they have with rich white people who somehow get them to vote for them.
But the new thing, but that's what I see happening, because I think after the uprising that was multiracial around George Floyd. It seems like the new tactics have been moved around the gender and
Well, yeah,
sexuality spectrum.
yeah, they
And
want to make
that's
you
the new
afraid of that.
divide. That's a new divider. And it's just terrible how messed up people seem to be about what freedom is. I mean, and what gender is. Like the idea, I don't know. It really scares me the way it seems to be working. And I don't know if any of you, maybe Charlotte, you want to speak to any of this?
Well, I think one reason that Republicans have gained traction is that Democrats are fighting with one hand tied behind their back, right? When Democrats don't want to engage and we leave that information vacuum empty and open, Republicans are all too happy to fill it. They have no problem weaponizing these issues in bad faith. President Biden has been very outspoken on trans rights. There have been a couple of Democratic leaders, Democratic members of Congress who have been outspoken. And the DNC has been doing a lot of work lately as well. But a lot of Democratic leaders are not speaking out. Right now, there is a state representative in Montana. Her name is Zoe Zephyr. And Montana moved to ban gender affirming care. Now, for those who don't know, gender affirming care is basically health care for children who are transgender. And this has been validated and affirmed by every major medical association. The American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, every physician's group and authority has said that gender affirming care is necessary and life-saving. There's no question. In fact, the American Medical Association said last year in a report and a study that gender affirming care could prevent as many as 73% suicides among trans kids. 73%. So here's why I'm saying this. When Montana moved to ban gender affirming care, Zoe Zephyr, who is the first openly trans state legislator in Montana, spoke out against it. And she said that Republicans would have blood on their hands. And she is absolutely correct in that. That is an accurate thing to say. Instead of listening to her and trying to engage respectfully, they barred her from the House floor of Montana, barred her. So she can't enter the House floor of Montana legislature for the rest of the session. I really like Senator John Tester. I think he's a great guy.
Before we get to Tester,
go ahead.
I know the reason why they banned her, but what was the pretext they used? Just saying you spoke.
They said
protests. She
yeah. There were.
Got you. Okay, so Charlotte.
Yeah, there were people who came in and.
So Tester, who we usually
right. So this is all of this is to get to this point, right? So Senator John Tester, I really admire him. I think he's a great guy, and I certainly hope he gets reelected next year. But it would be very easy for Senator Tester to speak out right now, and he's not. He knows this is going on. I reached out to his office, to his staff, and they said they would talk about it and see what could happen. But it's been a week now since she was barred from the floor. She's been mistreated terribly by Montana legislators, and he hasn't spoken out. And I think it's because Democrats, a lot of Democrats, including Senator Tester, are too scared to speak out about transphobia because they don't know enough about it. I'm not supposed to say that. I'm supposed to be a good Democrat and say that, these issues are complicated and that what matters is winning. But I got to tell you, folks, for the trans community right now, we're wondering what's the point in winning next year if we're not going to be protected. And it's been rather heartbreaking to watch us be left behind by some in the party who are far more concerned with re-election than they are taking care of the most vulnerable people in this country. And right now, that's trans children.
I just dropped for the folks watching in our private chat. There was a tweet by a really disgusting, and I say this, and I use the word disgusting, and I said today that I need to find a deeper word. But Kerry Seekins Crow, who is a representative, a Republican in Montana, after Zoe had offered, the facts with regard to trans youth and suicide, went on to the House floor to talk about her own daughter having had suicidal ideations, and said that she would rather her daughter commit suicide than to allow her to transition. And I want folks to sit with that for a minute, that when we are trying desperately within the LGBTQ community, the trans community specifically, to have a conversation, to offer up facts and statistics about what discrimination and anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ policy actually does. And when Zoe offered up, you are creating a crisis, and you will have blood on your hand, that the response from a Republican representative, like, think about the fucking climate that we live in, where you would get on the House floor and still have a fucking job after saying that you would rather your daughter take her own life than give her the opportunity to transition and live a full and complete life. This is coming from a party that has said that they are pro-life. This is coming from a party that says and has monopolized, and we have ceded the term family values to. And we sit here and you have the testers of the world sit there with a platform and say absolutely fucking nothing. Right? Why are Republicans running a campaign of hate against the trans community? Why are they creating a climate of violence where it is acceptable through their language of dehumanization for then somebody to take a gun, right? To take hands to a community that is already marginalized. But when you look at the murder rate of trans people, particularly Black trans women, it is well above the average. And why is that? Because you have politicians like Karen Seekins Crow in Montana who think that that they would rather, and there is no difference than when the Ku Klux Klan would say, there is no good Black person, but a dead Black person. That is exactly what they are doing right now to the trans community. And I got to tell you that I don't give a damn if Democrats understand what it means to have gender affirming care. You should know what it means to be fucking human and stand up for your fellow human. You don't have to understand every single concept around what it means to transition, what it means to be trans. You have to understand what it means to be human. And the fact that they can't step out on that fact, and we are just allowing our young trans community, we're saying, oh, well, go with God. I hope you'll be okay, right? That's what you're doing when you sit silent and you have a platform in the way that Tester does. And yes, Biden has been good on the issue, but let me tell you something. Good is not good enough when you have kids that are afraid to go to school. Good is not good enough when they're going to be, when medication is going to be stopped cold turkey, and we have no idea what the medical outcomes of that will be. You're on mute, Jen.
Oh, you're on mute, Jen.
Sorry. It's so upsetting that anyone would ever say that about another person, let alone their own child. And I feel the same way you do, both of you do, Charlotte and Danielle, which is anyone, especially anyone who is not trans, who understands anything about human rights and freedom, should be speaking to this. And one of the excuses you find being given to why folks claim they don't support gender affirming care is something I think people need to deal with head on, which is, what about this small percentage of people who detransition? And my response is, great. I'm glad people can detransition. There, a lot of, to the extent that you're exploring your gender identity and you're not sure if you're non-binary, you're trans, there's some people who are more sure than others. The excuse they give is that this is so terrible. Well, if you have, 1,000 people and 1 or 2 or 10, I don't care what it is, decide it's not for them, there's no harm. And we're talking about the kinds of things we're talking about for gender affirming care for young people are hormones or hormone suppressants, depending on things. There can be things like, usually at 18, maybe younger, there might be things like top surgery or whatever. So what? People, if you have top surgery because you're assigned female at birth and you really think you're, you really are not comfortable with that, and later you decide, you know what, I regret that. In the rare instance, you could have surgery there. When I was growing up, there were young people, I'm Jewish, who didn't, I'm mentioning this, who didn't like what their nose looked like. There are other people who have noses they don't like. I'm just referring to this. And a good percentage of Jewish women did that. Did anyone say to them, oh my God, you're going to regret it later? Look, how come we didn't have 100 articles about, who was the girl the young woman from Dirty Dancing? What's her name? Jennifer Gray.
I cannot think of her name.
Jennifer Gray.
Yeah.
Jennifer Gray.
Yeah, Jennifer
so
Gray.
people, you know, she never looked like herself again. You know, so she regretted it. Guess what? No one else has ever regretted that if they did it. Or people who don't like the size of their chest.
It's a bullshit. It's a bullshit argument.
What I'm saying, no, it's a bullshit argument.
It's bullshit.
It's a bullshit argument. But I think you have to so they're scaring parents and scaring the public into thinking this is something that people aren't choosing and that most people regret. And my view is whatever. Like, why, you know, people often change how they present their gender within a certain frame. And I feel like there are some people who really understand, you know, they were born assigned female at birth, but they really are male. And let them do what they're going to do. And there are others, you know, I don't know. I just don't understand I wish people would talk about this without shame. And I know that maybe I'm going on and on, but these are normal conversations. Sorry, Charlotte, go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. You're doing great. No, I'm preaching all this. This is great. I just wanted to really quickly point out, you know, even among the very extremely small percent of the trans community that does detransition, the vast majority of them do so because they don't have resources, right? They don't have access to healthcare. They don't have a social safety net. They detransition out of survival. They do it because otherwise they would be homeless, they would die, they wouldn't be employed. You know, the vast majority of detransitioners choose to go that route because otherwise they would just cease to exist. And that was because we don't have a society set up to support trans people. That's why. So when I see all these articles about detransitioners, you know, my heart goes out to them because they clearly did not have the love and support they needed to go along the path they needed. And by the way, I want to be very clear about this. Let's just do a fresh reminder for everybody watching. You don't get hormones before you're 16 if you're a trans kid. And you'll get surgery before 18 if you're a trans teenager. Those are the medical paths that have been cited by every major medical authority, have been confirmed and said to be healthy by every major medical authority. Last year, there were 3,200 young women in this country who had breast enhancement surgery, 3,200 cosmetic breast enhancement surgery. Where are the bills to ban this? Nowhere. Because those young girls or those young women and their parents and doctors talked about it and decided maybe that's the best path for them. We can debate, or you know, maybe it's not my place to debate, whatever. I'm just saying that trans teenagers aren't getting surgeries, and yet here we have this huge industry of young women in high school who get breast enhancement surgery, and no one gives a shit about that. You know?
And my view on that is if their doctors think it's better for their identity and how they see themselves, okay, right? But you're exactly right. Like, where is that conversation?
I mean, the reality for me here as a person who is not trans but is queer is that I don't really give a fuck about your opinion on my humanity, right? Like, I actually don't give a fuck. I don't give it, like, I feel, and you know, it's just the consistency of having to explain, right? And bring people along to just see somebody as human, capable of making decisions for themselves, for their family, and not leaving that the fuck alone, right? Like, I'm not asking you to be a medical professional. I am not asking you to understand from beginning to end the trans experience. What I'm asking you is to understand the human experience and the fact that I don't want anyone being able to debate my humanity and tell me how I can or cannot live, right? Or that I am deserving of basically taking my own life, right? Because I make you uncomfortable, right? Which is essentially what the Republican Party is doing. And Democrats who are silent on this issue and not as fervent as they should be are complicit. And because of that complicity, people will die. People are dying. Right. And so I feel like the fact that we continually, as people from marginalized communities, have to explain our humanity already puts us on the losing side of this. I shouldn't have to explain to you a fucking thing other than the fact that I am human and I'm worthy of dignity and respect like everyone else is. Your daughter wants to get breast implants? Bet. Go for it. Right. Mine wants to remove their breast? Bet. Go for it, because that should be the choice between people and their doctors, period.
And I want to add, I 100% agree. And I want to add that my life is enriched by trans people. I don't tolerate trans people. My life is enriched by anyone, especially against all odds, against the oppression, who still has joy and courage and support enough to be their full selves. That makes the world a better place for me. It doesn't matter that it makes a better place for me. It's none of my business. But this is.
Well, listen, Jen, I disagree. I can't stand trans people. So that's where we have to depart, in opinion.
Oh my gosh. Well, Danielle, I know you've got a dash. We got a few more minutes here. It's been lovely hosting. There she went. So, what did we?
She pieced out. She did an Irish accent there.
Oh, you've got
How
some
you doing,
flags.
Jen?
I am good. I mean, despite how crazy the world is, we could just keep moving forward. And I've been finding a lot of peace and refuge and creativity in reading. I started a podcast that's only on nonfiction books called Booked Up, but so I'm cheating on the side and reading fiction. And that's been fun, and poetry. And I just, there's something about returning to poetry, certain poems at different points in your life, or certain music that is so enriching. Is there anything?
So
What
true.
are you? What kind of art are you escaping into these days, Charlotte? As we wrap.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So Maggie Smith is one of my favorite poets. She has this great poem called Good Bones.
I love
But
it.
her new memoir is out. Her memoir is called We Can Make This Place Beautiful. And it's about her divorce. And it is excellent, y'all. Maggie Smith, she wrote this gorgeous book about, so basically the premise is that she got big after that book of poems that she released. And her husband got really resentful and insecure over it and made her life hell.
Oh
Yeah.
no. What?
So she wrote a book about that, and it is so wonderful and deeply empathetic and powerful, very empowering. So anyway, I love her. Can I point out real quick that there are two important months? This is Jewish American Heritage Month, and it's Asian American Pacific Islander Month. And so it's really good that we all, those of us who are not Asian or Jewish, that we really just kind of lean into that and be good supportive allies of those communities, because both have been under enormous violence and discrimination over the past several years. So it's very important we stand beside them and make sure that we're celebrating these communities.
That is such a good point. Thank you for reminding me of those months. And also, thank you for telling me a little bit more about Maggie's book. I have not picked my May book of the month, and I'm wondering if you wanted maybe to be one of my special guests, and we could. Have you read it already? Or
Yes.
No?
Oh,
would
yes,
you
I
be?
have.
Would you
I
do
love
it?
it.
Are you? I'm going to talk to you
Yeah.
after, but would you be one of my special guests talking about the book since you love it?
Jen, I'll do anything you ask me. I love you. I
Okay.
think you're great. Of
Well,
course.
can you tell me where you got that blouse? Because I like that too. It's gorgeous.
Oh, thank you so much. This was from Nordstrom Rack. Yeah. It was $25. So I found a good deal.
It's very pretty. Okay,
Thank you.
well, let's just keep the conversations going in between what is really a looming disaster with a debt crisis and creeping fascism. We always have to find some peace of mind, some joy, and some honesty in our personal lives and in the art that we select, I believe. And with that, thank you all. Mary was out this week, and she let us all host in her absence. And thank you for sticking with us.
Thank you, Jen.